Okay, so back when I was in my third year of uni, me and all my mates decided to go to this massive Halloween warehouse party as a group. For reference, we were 5 girls between the ages of 20 to 22. We all got dolled up in our various costumes, do some pre-drinking after meeting up in one of our flats. Then we get a taxi into the town center to head down to the club at about 11 at night. We get there, the music is great. Everyone looks lush, and aside from the steep drink prices, we were all having a better night. And then out of nowhere, some absolute bellend decides to ruin my night by harassing me wherever I went. I'm not one to turn down a drink or a dance if a lad is fit enough, but this wanker thought that it would be funny to act all creepy around us in a spooky clown outfit. And let me tell you something, I hate clowns. I'm serious. I'm 100% terrified of them, and I have been ever since I was a little girl. So for him to come up and think it's funny to actually scare me by making his mask stare at me was not my idea of a laugh. When I told him to F off, he kept saying, "Oh, come on, love, it's only a joke." But I wasn't in the mood for him, so I walked off to the bar and ignored him. After that, I kept noticing him looking at me from across the bar, keeping his mask on and staring at me because he knew it bothered me so much. I tried to just ignore him and focus on having a good time, but he really made it difficult, and I never felt 100% safe. Later on that night, after a few more drinks, I started to need a wee, so I asked my friend to come with me to the toilets. I had to basically drag her away from the bar because she was chatting, and then just when we're outside the girls' toilets, she sees some guy that she'd fancied, so she asked me to wait a minute while I got his number. I tried to wait for her, I really did, but when I started to feel like I'd wee myself, so I just went into the toilets and found a cubicle. And this was later on at night, the last hour of the club night, so it was already emptying out and the toilets weren't that busy. I found myself a cubicle and then text my mate while I was having a wee to tell her where I was. I finish up, open the door of the cubicle, then walk out in the direction of the sinks to wash my hands, and then I see him. Clown Boy had just walked into the girls' toilets, still with his mask on, and he's making it stare at me again. There's no other girls in the toilets, and he's not laughing and trying to be funny like he was on the dance floor, and we're completely alone, and him just staring at me. He starts saying, "I was only joking, love. No need to be so uptight." And all this, but all I've got to tell him is to get out of the bloody girls' toilets and how he's a perv for following me into them. I'm trying to act all tough and angry, but inside I'm absolutely terrified, and I'm praying that another girl comes in and joins us soon. Thankfully, I didn't have to wait that long, and soon enough these other girls walk in and start berating this horrid clown boy for being in the girls' toilets. The noise then attracts one of the bouncers who radios his mates, and before long, the clown boy is being thrown out of the club for having gone into the girls' bathroom. I was buzzing, honestly. He seemed really angry at me and acting like it was my fault for getting him kicked out, but he couldn't do anything about it because he was basically being dragged out by the bouncers. What started as quite a scary situation ended up with a brilliant ending, because now I could enjoy the last hour before closing time without worrying about getting harassed. The club night finishes, but in the chaos of what spills out of the club and into the kebab houses across the road, I manage to lose all my mates. In the end, it's just me, on my own, struggling to get a taxi, and because it's October, I'm freezing my nips off. None of the black cabs had their lights on, and the ones that did got snapped up before I could even get a word in. It started to look like I was going to have to walk home, which would take about half an hour, and since I was wearing heels and a miniskirt, there was no chance of that happening. It was either walk, stand around waiting for a taxi around sleazy lads trying to chat me up, or a third option. There was a lad I'd been dating on and off that lived in a flat quite close to the town center, a flat that was maybe only 5 minutes walk away from the club I was at. I could call him and ask him to sleep over, but the problem was that he might think it was something that it wasn't. That, and I was still into him when I honestly wasn't anymore. Point being, I was still in two minds when I actually called him, woke him up, and told him my problem. He said it was fine, that he'd get up and get me a blanket so I could sleep on his couch. Knowing I could leave the chaos outside the club felt like such a relief. Definitely not the kind of place you want to be as a girl on her own. But then, as I'm walking away, I feel a bit guilty worrying about where my mates are, so I'm calling them and texting them, trying to get a response out of any of them, but no one will reply to me. So, picture the scene. I'm drunk, wobbling in my heels, trying to get my mates and remember how to get to this guy's flat, all at the same time. It put my multitasking abilities to the test, but I just about managed it, right up until I saw someone sitting on some steps not far ahead of me. They looked quite young, about my age, and they were absolutely plastered. They were sitting on the stone steps of a building, but they were leaning up against the wall next to them, looking like they were just completely out of it. I instantly got a bit nervous about walking past them on my own, so I crossed over to the other side of the street and just tried to get past them without drawing any attention. But in my heels, with that bloody clacking, it was almost impossible just to walk past without the drunk man noticing. I knew the moment he saw me because he starts drunkenly saying, "Oi, where you going?" But it was so slurred that I thought he just sat there on the steps, slurring to himself. But then the next thing, he's shouting "Oi," even louder, and I look over my shoulder to see a lad who looked like he was half wearing a bowler suit from the waist down and who was carrying something in his hand. I couldn't work out what it was about him, but he looked oddly familiar, and it was only when he brought the thing to his hand up to his face that I realized what it was. He was carrying a mask, that same creepy clown mask that had been staring at me all night. It wasn't just some random drunk I've been walking past. It was Clown Boy, and he was not happy to see me. I just kept walking at first, hoping that he was too drunk to follow me, but all it took was one look over my shoulder to see that he was. Granted, he was only stumbling towards me, trying to work one of his arms into his boiler suit costume thing, but he was definitely trying to follow. Again, my go-to move was to get bullshit, and I turned around to shout at him that if he came anywhere near me, I'd call the police and have him arrested. But that only seemed to make him laugh. His laugh in the club had been cringy, but now, with him being as drunk as he was, his laugh sounded all unhinged, a sound that was made even creepier when contained in the plastic clown mask that was creeping me out harder than ever. I tried walking as fast as I could in my heels, powering it towards a left turn that I knew I needed to take. I turned, acting like I was still going at walking pace, then I took off my heels and ran as fast as I could along the cold, wet pavement, hoping I could recognize where my date's flat was in the dark. I think that was the one move that saved me from something unspeakable that night, as Clown Boy didn't realize that I put some distance between us until we finally turned the corner and saw that I was running. He shouted again, but I didn't look back that time. I just kept going, keeping my eye out for the right apartment building. It felt like forever, but in the end, I spotted the right building, crossed over the road, then was almost at the buzzer when I felt it. This sharp, stabbing pain right in the center of my right foot, and I let out this really loud yelp of pain before basically hopping up the rest of the steps. I rang the guy's buzzer. He let me in, and I just about got myself through the big heavy door before I had to sit down and call him to come down and get me. As part of my black cat costume, I was wearing black tights that night, and there was blood just dripping off my heels as I was sitting down and holding my foot in the air. I didn't see it, but I knew what it was. I'd stood on some broken glass, and it had cut me really, really deep. Weirdly, it didn't hurt at all, even though there were loads of blood and I knew it was a deep cut. I think the adrenaline just kept me going, that and knowing that I was actually safe. The guy ended up driving me to A&E at about 4:30 in the morning, and we had to wait in a waiting room that was almost entirely made up of other people in costumes who'd hurt themselves while drunk. The guy I'd been dating on and off stayed with me the whole time, even held my hand when it was my turn to be examined. I thought that I might just get away with stitches, but I ended up having to stay in A&E for hours because the doctors wanted to make sure that there was no leftover glass in my foot. Thankfully, there wasn't. The doctor had got it all out on the first exam, but then I needed to get my foot stitched up, so that was more hanging around and waiting for something that was really, really unpleasant. Finally, after about 3 hours of sitting around and getting treatment, I was free to leave. A doctor told me to stay off my foot for at least a fortnight, but other than that, I was okay. I ended up going back to Leeds to stay with my parents while I was healing up, but the whole time I've been texting Joe, the guy who'd given me the lift and had been so nice during such a horrible time. We agreed to go on another date when I got back, as I thought giving me a second chance after all that was the least I could do. And I think that's where our relationship really started. When I realized how supportive and loving he could be during a crisis, I'd been incredibly indecisive about any potential relationship with him, but that sealed it, and we've been dating for coming up on 8 years now. A bit of a weird origin story for a relationship, I know, but it makes total sense in my head. That run-in with Clown Boy was without a doubt the most unsettling and frightening thing that had happened to me during my university years. Probably the one time I ever truly felt unsafe in Sheffield town center. I'm still eternally grateful to Joe for everything he did for me that night, and I'm hoping he'll keep me feeling safe for many years to come.
If you really like my content and want to support me, please like this video and click the subscribe button. It helps me to grow my channel as essential in reaching a wider audience. Most of you watching my videos aren't subscribed to my channel, and that's why my animations can't reach their full potential. They aren't recommended to more people who would surely love my content as much as you do. You can always unsubscribe at any moment. Thank you in advance, and enjoy the rest of the video.
It was Halloween 2012, my senior year of high school. I went to a Catholic school, so we always had the day off after Halloween because it was considered a church holy day. So my friends were game to start our weekend early. On nights where we didn't go to parties, we usually do the same thing. We sit on my front steps for a couple of hours and joke around. Then we would walk the neighborhood and usually end up at this shitty pizza place across town because the prices were so cheap. Since a few of us had recently broken up with our girlfriends, we weren't in much of a party mood, so we did our usual. It's around 10:30 at night, and the pizza joint is closing up for the night. There were 3 of us, me, my friend Pat, and my friend Jack. We finish our food, refill our drinks, and head out. To get back to my house, we had to cross this large mall parking lot that's about 4 football fields long and 2 wide. I should mention at this point that we aren't dumb, naive kids. We all had grown up in the city and had our fair share of urban experiences. All 3 of us were pretty streetwise and were confident on the street by ourselves. But we experienced something this night that we were totally unprepared for. So we're walking through this parking lot and it's absolutely desolate, not a soul in sight. Suddenly we see a white tradesman van creeping slowly behind us, about 100 yards back. I know the old white van cliche, but I swear it's a real story. I point it out to my friends, and we pick up our pace. We pop the collars on our jackets and we hunch our shoulders out to make us seem a lot bigger than what we were. In an instant, the van speeds up and cuts off our path. Everything in the van is pitch black, so we can't see anyone in there. That's when someone calls out in a non-threatening voice, "Hey man, happy Halloween. You guys like Halloween?" Despite the jovial manner in which this was said, a van doesn't cut you off in a parking lot unless it had bad intentions. We had nowhere to go. We could run, but they're in a van. They would catch up easily and we'd have to turn our backs to them. He says it again. "Hey man, you guys like Halloween?" I respond trying to sound tough. "Yeah, but it's over now, alright? So we're heading home and you're on our way." "Nah, dude, it ain't over. We still got tons of candy in here." The tone suddenly shifted and still we can't see anyone in the van. 3 of us puff our chest out and get ready for a fight. After a brief silence that felt like it dragged on for hours, Jack cuts the tension by sternly saying, "Hey, listen up, man. I don't know what you think you're about to do, but if you don't leave, it's gonna be a problem." Once he said that, the back door of the van swung open, and 2 very tall men stepped out. They had black suits on with black leather gloves and were well built and strong looking. But the most menacing thing was that they were both wearing these cheap Mitt Romney masks. That's when we realized this wasn't a Halloween prank. At that moment, all three of us went to take off, but the van started driving circles around us. We had no idea how we were going to get out of this situation. I have no idea what these guys were planning to do with three 18-year-old men, but they seemed like they knew what they were doing, and we were all getting ready for the fight of our lives. The van stopped, and it looked like they were about to make their move. This was it. I mentioned that there was three of us that night. It was at this moment that our friend, Pat, the one who had stayed silent up to this point, leaned in to the both of us and quietly said,
"Hey, this is a Hail Mary, but get ready to fucking run when I say go, alright?"
He then picked up one of our sodas, which was in a cup, and threw it with all his might at the driver's side window. The window was open, and the cup miraculously connected with the driver's head. Pat screamed "run," and we took off across the parking lot. The van swilled off in the other direction, and we hurried our asses home. Jack and I were both confused as to why a simple cup of soda got them to give up their plans. Then we found out what actually happened. While we were panicking, Pat kept his cool. He nonchalantly dumped out the drink that was in his hand and slipped a big-ass rock into the cup. Then he waited for the right moment. The driver, thinking that this kid just threw a drink at him, wound up getting pegged in the head with a rock. It probably knocked him out cold, or at least brought us enough time to put some distance between us. All that was left after that was pulling off a miracle and getting the rock to hit. Maybe a guardian angel or God himself took care of that. I'm still amazed by it. But moral of the story, kids, don't panic when you're in a tight spot. If you lose your cool, you lose your fight. I'm a 32-year-old female living in Colorado, and Halloween is by far my favorite time of the year. But one Halloween stands out in my mind that I'll never forget, and it's not for the right reasons. It was 2007 and I was about 17 years old. Once it got dark, I met up with a few of my friends, Brittany, Rick, Curtis, and Micah. We were walking around a trailer park, smoking weed, and taking shots, and just having a good time. We must have been walking for about 20 minutes when we came up on this group of guys that were smoking a meth pipe just out in the open. We just walked straight past them when one of them yelled, "Hey," as loud as possible. We all stopped and turned around, and Curtis said, "Yeah?" One of the guys asked in a demanding voice,
"Want to give me a hit of what you got there?"
Curtis held up the roach. We just finished smoking, and he said,
"Sorry, man. We just finished it off."
They didn't reply. They just turned away from us. Suddenly, one of them turned around and asked for $5. Again, Curtis responded,
"Sorry, man, I'm broke."
The guy gave a really weird smile, baring his crooked yellow teeth, but his eyes were dead and cold. It was very unsettling and clearly a forced smile. He then said,
"Oh, all right. You guys have a good night."
We turned back and started walking away. Something was off about that group of people. But then again, they were on hard drugs. We walked for about a minute until I heard a bunch of people running up behind us. It was Halloween at that time, so there was a lot of people everywhere. But it was that group of people again, and they were coming up fast. We bolted down the road, and everyone ran off in different directions. I jumped a few fences and hid inside a random person's shed. My heart was beating so hard I thought it was about to explode. I waited about 20 minutes, slowly opened the shed, and peered out. I didn't see anyone, so I started to look for my friends. Found Brittany and Rick. We looked around for Curtis and Micah. Curtis' phone was dead and Micah wasn't answering. We finally found Curtis. One of those psychos stabbed him in the leg and took his wallet, and his jeans were soaked in blood. We called 911 right away. Then we found Micah laying on the sidewalk. She could barely get up, and she told us that two of the guys jumped her and beat her, as well as stealing her money from her pocket. For reference, Micah is about 115 pounds and 5'1". It disgusts me to think that full-grown men were so high that they thought it was okay to beat up an innocent small girl like that. It definitely ruined one of my favorite holidays, and I still think about it these years later. If a random group of people ever call out to you, just keep walking. Always carry a taser, pepper spray, just any weapon. You never know what kind of weirdos are lurking out there in the dark. I'm a girl, and this happened when I was about 9 years old. At the time, I loved to trick or treat in my neighborhood. This was short-lived because, by then, my neighborhood wasn't exactly safe anymore. That year, which was 1992, I attended a church Halloween party. There were many kids that I recognized from school and from nearby areas. I dressed up in a little devil costume that year, complete with paste-on horns and, the usual. Yeah, a little bold for a church party, but several other kids were dressed as devils, and I saw many girls dressed as witches. The party host, who I'll call Father Francis, stood greeting everyone. I remember he was dressed like a version of Captain Hook. Every kid attending got goodie bags at the door from Father Francis. For some reason, every kid who was dressed up as a witch or a devil got a baggie of homemade cookies. They looked like sugar cookies, with powdered sugar dusting the tops. The party was great fun, but I was eager to get home and try a cookie. Father Francis had told us not to eat the cookies there because he said it's our little secret. I saw nothing sinister at the time, but looking back, something seemed weird and wrong. When I got home, I decided to try one the next day. I remember finally trying a cookie. I almost immediately spat it out in the garbage. It tasted really bad, and the powdered sugar was bitter tasting. My mom noticed my reaction and asked to try one. Her reaction was identical to mine. She demanded to know where I've gotten these from. I told her Father Francis had given me a bag of them. Grabbing the bag, she inspected the cookies. She smelled the bag, making a suspicious face. And then she tasted the powdered sugar. Her eyes widened, and she practically hurled the bag of cookies into the trash.
Don't eat those, honey, alright? Those are bad. Very bad cookies.
As this was a Saturday, we had no way of alerting fellow classmates or friends. Monday, I learned the worst had happened. 16 children, all who had been given a bag of cookies, had been hospitalized for contamination. We learned the powdered sugar was in fact ant chalk. Of the 16 children that got sick, 2 died because they'd eaten a whole bag of cookies. Thankfully, I never got sick because I only bitten one, but never swallowed it. Father Francis ended up going to prison for 20 years for his involvement. He claimed in his defense, he was doing God's work by ridding the world of evil. He turned out to be an evil man who felt no pity for the children who got sick, or the 2 who had sadly died. I heard as they hauled him off to prison, he kept screaming,
I did God's work. I'm a tool of God. I did nothing wrong. I did nothing wrong.
From then on, I never attended another church party of any kind, and my trust for those figures was pretty much destroyed. I also have almost never accepted baked goods from others again. I kept thinking, what if I had been one of those who had eaten a full bag? Chances are I've been hospitalized too, or much worse. The moral of the story is, be careful of anything you accept from others, even if they're a person of cloth.
This happened to me when I was 24 years old while home alone, primarily on Halloween night. During this time, I was still living with my parents as I was still a college student that didn't have a job with any money. My parents had to take my younger brother, who was around 10 at the time, to one of his friends' Halloween parties to have their fun. I had been invited to a Halloween party myself, but decided not to go as I'd came down with a mild fever earlier that day and didn't want to risk it going back up. Therefore, I was left at home to hand out candy for the trick-or-treaters, which I didn't mind even though some kids would be annoying. Throughout the night, I'd constantly be sitting on the couch, either playing some video games or watching Netflix, and would pause it once there was a knock at the door. Fast forward to around 10 p.m., Halloween started to die down. People stopped answering their doors and turning off all the lights until everyone was gone. Just as I was about to turn off the TV and get some shut-eye, I heard yet another knock at the door. In my mind, I thought it would be more of those pesky trick-or-treaters, but when I opened the door, I was greeted as someone who was at least 6'5", definitely not a kid. They had on what looked to be a zombie mask of some type, which I must admit was pretty creepy. The design was on point and the mask seemed very well detailed. I also noticed that he had a handgun sticking out of his back pocket, but at that point, I completely dismissed it as a prop. "Oh, hey there, happy Halloween," and proceeded to grab the bowl so he could take some candy. The only problem was that he either didn't acknowledge or care about the fact that he even said anything. In fact, I noticed that he didn't even have a candy bag with him. He just stood there motionless, slowly tilting his head to the side to, I guess, create more suspense. At this point, I'm a bit creeped out and told him that I had to go and to have a nice night, while closing the door and making sure it was locked. I looked through the people, and to my surprise, he was still standing by the stoop like a statue. I figured that it was probably some edgy teen playing a joke on people and that he'd eventually have to leave. And he did. An hour later, my parents had returned home with my brother and I decided to call it a night as I had class early the next morning. But there was yet another knock at the door, this time much more loud. I opened it and was greeted with 2 police officers with very serious looks. My dad then came to the door and one of them had asked us if we had seen anyone come to our house with a mask and a concealed firearm. At first, I didn't know what they were talking about. But then I remembered about my encounter. Their description matched the person I saw almost perfectly, and it was no doubt him. They went on to explain that the person I saw supposedly murdered his girlfriend and had dumped her body in a nearby lake. He was put in a mental institution a few years back and was released on, quote, good behavior. My heart dropped into the pit of my stomach as they said this. A few days later, my mom found a letter in our mailbox that wasn't in any sort of envelope. Written in big bold letters were the words, "You made the right decision when you locked the door."